Gentlemen, another interesting approach show today. We have a guest. Her name is Micha Star Liberty, and she is, as I looked at her CV, almost a perfect lawyer. And so I had to staple the pages together for her resume and what we call a CV. I mean, there's a whole page here on recognition. There's a whole page here on articles that she has written. So obviously can't talk about all of those. But I want to get the public to get a sense of what a real in a trench lawyer does. And so I want to welcome you today and ask you to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself. You probably used the whole half hour to go through it all, but just give us a little background on your bio.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me here today, Judge. It's a real pleasure and honor. And the topic we're going to talk about is near and dear to my heart. I'll just tell you how I got started in the line of work that I do. So I represent almost exclusively victims of sexual assault, child sex abuse, and human sex trafficking. And I've been doing that my whole career. I've been a lawyer 25 years and had my own firm for 20 of those years. And when I was a 17-year-old girl, I lost one of my dear friends to a serial killer in San Diego. He's still on death row. His name's Cleophas Prince, and he raped and murdered my dear friend and in her home. And her mother came home unexpectedly. He was still in the house. And then my friend's mother met the same tragic, violent end as well. And at that young age of 17, I just decided to dedicate my life to helping women, people who've experienced gender violence, domestic violence, sexual violence. And I went to work in politics after college and then went to law school. And the rest is contained in those pages on my website that you see.
It took me 10 minutes to read it. I mean, and I read a lot, and I read pretty fast too. But this took a while, and I was very impressed by the breadth and the depth of the things that you've done. And the articles run the gamut, of course, and the recognitions are obviously well deserved. And I noticed you were vice president of the state bar. I mean,
yes,
not my favorite group, but you know,
well,
whatever. A subject for another day. Maybe
exactly.
we'll have somebody from the state bar. But I was very impressed, and I heard the other night when on one of the TV shows when they talked about human trafficking, because it's a very important subject right now. It's always been important. It's getting a lot of play right now, was saying the interchangeability of the word trafficking with prostitution.
Oh,
And they're saying they're the same. It's just to change the name. Do you disagree with that?
I do. Prostitution sometimes, not always, is something that people engage in of their own free will. Trafficking is not. Trafficking is being bought and sold to different people, customers, for sex. It often happens where the person who's being trafficked has their driver's license, their passport, all their money, any identification taken from them. They depend on everything being given to them by their traffickers. So if they don't get food, they don't eat. It's not like they can leave or be by themselves. They are under the thumb of the traffickers. And what's important to note is since the pandemic, we have seen online trafficking explode. And, you know, that's very different than the sites where, like OnlyFans, where people can voluntarily have an OnlyFans page and engage in some of the same conduct that might be included in sex trafficking, but they're doing it of their own volition. That is how they're choosing to make money. Trafficking is not that. None of those, mostly women, and 1 out of 3 are children. Most of those folks don't have any choices whatsoever.
Let's start from the beginning and trace it from the beginning to where we are today. And you can include legislation or proposed legislation, because people need to know that it's out there, or how they contact their representative to make sure that the support for whatever is out there that they agree with. So we'll talk about that now. But let's start with your average, and I know that's kind of a general term, your average person, teenage, let's say it's teenage, from a different country. How does it all start?
Well, a lot of time, like I said, we'll talk about online in a second because it really has evolved. But traditionally, what would happen is someone, a male, sometimes a woman, would be hired as the recruiter, and they would find young, young teenage girls and boys, befriend them. Sometimes they would engage in what the victim, the trafficking victim, thought was a consensual romantic relationship, and then that trafficker would then try to sell them or try to convince their girlfriend to spend time with another friend, another adult friend who was really a John. So that is how the most common type of trafficking starts. There is, of course, what everyone thinks of when they think of Hollywood movies, someone being, I call it the white windowless van and zip tie kind of trafficking, where people are snatched off the streets. And that still happens. It's a lot more rare because it's easier to get caught. But that still absolutely happens.
So what numbers are we looking at, if you have any, representing the cases, individuals who are basically victims of this kind of trafficking?
Yeah. So human trafficking, both labor and sex, are a $150 billion industry. Labor trafficking represents about $20,000 per human trafficked. The real money for the criminals is in sex trafficking, and that's the rest of the 150 billion. Like I said, it's almost 80% of those being trafficked are women, 1 in 3 are children, and most of those children are girls. So these numbers are astronomical, and we are seeing the percentages go up every single year. There's all kinds of organizations around the globe who try to fight trafficking and are tracking all of these statistics. But what we saw after the pandemic was, for example, Facebook, which everyone thinks is just a way to socialize online, has become a massive trafficking site. And the human trafficking on Facebook went up 250% during the pandemic. So now a victim can go through the entire trafficking cycle: identification, recruitment, grooming, solicitation, facilitation, and sale, all online.
Nothing can be done about it? Is there something that can be done about it?
There is, absolutely. And, I have a background in politics. So for me, my first instinct is always to think legislatively. How can we write the laws in a better way to help protect survivors? So I'm in California. We have a decent trafficking statute with a 10-year statute of limitations. The feds have a good trafficking statute with a nice long statute of limitations, but it is difficult to hold the platforms. Some say impossible. I don't think anything is impossible when it comes to protecting survivors. But the way to stop trafficking online is to hold the platforms accountable, to hold the credit card processors accountable, to hold the ride shares companies accountable, because a lot of times the traffickers are putting, one of the women or children they're trafficking in an Uber, So,
Wow,
so
that's kind of interesting.
yeah,
Well, of course, it calls to mind the potential liability of a company like Uber if they were
correct.
known to have carried someone who's either a victim or a participant in a crime. That's a felony on its own. But
Absolutely.
you can see where that's going. But
Exactly. And the problem that we have legislatively, federally, is the Communications Decency Act,
right.
Section 230.
Oh yes, I'm very familiar with that section. In fact, there was some talk during the last administration, and I think even during this one, that they're going to somehow amend the statute to provide for liability as opposed to right now they have immunity. These companies have immunity from any litigation in certain circumstances. And if
Right.
people really want to know, they should look at the Communications Act. Was it about 1990 or something? Wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was around 96.
Yeah.
Al Gore had just invented the internet. We were all still just using most of what was available online to have driving directions and print them out. So it was a whole different day and age, but it was passed to protect children from access or to prevent them from getting access to pornography online. So the whole motivation behind Section 230 was to protect children from pornography. And what we see now is it's being used as a shield just to protect the platforms. And the children are being exposed now to being forced into either creating what they call self-generated CSAM, that's child sexual abuse material, or other types of videos related to the sexual abuse of children online.
And in a general sense, and one of the things that judges do is sentencing. In some situations, it's discretionary. The old federal rule wasn't discretionary. That's now been modified to some degree. But they sentences range from low term, mid term, and high term. I know because I started as a prosecutor, but the reality is that it's somewhat flexible. What is the general term that is applied to somebody who gets caught basically trafficking? What do they expect to be looking at, assuming no priors?
It really depends on how they're trafficking, how many people they're trafficking. If they're trafficking CSAM, child sexual abuse material online, each one of those images is another offense. So those sentences can be quite large, but we see differences all over the place. It's still a struggle for lawyers who do this kind of work civilly, and we always help our clients go through the criminal process pursuant to Marcy's law, just so they've got someone on their side and they're helping them through the criminal process. But it really depends. We still see so much bias and such a resistance to believing that this is a real thing and this really happens.
Well, you and I know what Marcy's law is, but the general public, 99.9%, have no clue. So tell everybody what is Marcy's law and how it was promulgated to begin with.
Sure. So Marcy's law is essentially a crime victims bill of rights. So your viewers may know that every criminal defendant has a bunch of constitutional rights, and that's how our system is built. And we believe that that's the fair way to do it. Until the late 80s, there was no talk of what about the rights of crime victims themselves? Do they have the right to be kept aware of what's going on in the criminal case? Do they have the right to participate in a preliminary hearing? That's the hearing that leads up to the judge saying whether or not the person accused has to stand over for trial. Marcy's Law was written by Marcy's brother, and Marcy was a young woman who was a victim of domestic violence and eventually killed by her partner in Santa Barbara County. And when the partner was going through the criminal process, the parents weren't getting any information about what was going on. After Marcy's funeral, her parents went to a store just to pick up some food. You know, they were distraught. They hadn't been home, so they needed to get something to have for dinner that night. Coincidentally, the perpetrator who killed their daughter was in the grocery store with them. And he turned around and started yelling at them. And they, went and complained and said, how could you let him out? He had been in custody. They let him out. They didn't, the parents weren't notified that he was out. So Marcy's brother went on a nationwide campaign, and he actually got our California Constitution amended by proposition to allow for crime victims to have rights as they're going through the criminal process as victims of crime. And now almost every state has some sort of Marcy's Law protection, and a lot of them have put it into their constitutions as well.
For those of us who follow it, the Communication Act that we've been talking about, it was basically lobbied for by the companies, which is not unusual. And so what does the Communication Act mean as it stands today without any amendments or modifications?
It essentially says that you can't hold an internet service provider or an internet content provider accountable for the dissemination of child pornography or CSAM, or any material that could cause eating disorders, encourage self-harm. I mean, we're seeing so many different claims being brought against the online companies, all these platforms, because they cause depression and, the outgrowth of all of that. But the way that it's being interpreted now is if anything's on a platform and the platform didn't put it there, they're not responsible for it. But to my mind, they're wrong because they profit from it. They won't take down, if you report CSAM, even though there are laws that say you've got to take it down, you've got to respond, they don't respond to the complaints when you say, hey, my child is depicted in child pornography on your platform, and they don't take it down right away. And the reason why they don't is because this kind of content gets so much traffic, and it's retweeted or shared, and there are known hashtags. So the perpetrators know what to look for when they're, searching on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of them. And the companies are able to sell more ad space. That's really what we're talking about. They don't want to have to take it down. They don't want to be responsible, even though they're profiting from it. And they don't want their numbers to go down because that's how they sell.
Okay, so let's look forward now. What is the proposed legislation meant to accomplish?
The proposed legislation that there's a Stop CSAM federally, which is essentially, the standard is so high and so impossible, it might as well be called Start CSAM. There's a private right of action statute that's being proposed here in California. What
does that mean?
So a private right of action, a lot of claims like the criminal code, for example, for your viewers, only the government can prosecute those cases. So a victim of a crime doesn't always have the ability to go into a civil court and say, I'm a victim of a crime, but I also, would like to recover because of the negligence of this perpetrator or whatever. You can't always do that unless legislation is passed that includes some language that says the person, the individual, is allowed to file a case in court.
Not a criminal case.
Not a criminal case. That's right. That's right.
That is never going to change. It's embedded in our Constitution. But what's the success rate been in terms of prosecutions?
Well, criminal prosecutions have been pretty darn successful. It's just getting the different law enforcement agencies to pay attention, and to decide to actually press charges and go forward. We've seen a lot of work on revenge porn cases here in California when the former vice president was the attorney general here. We've seen federal cases go forward. And right now we're kind of watching all the different circuits. And for your viewers, that means in federal court, there's, every state has federal courts, and there's different districts. And then they have bosses who hear all the appeals. And so what we're doing is trying out different strategies in different circuits to see what kind of opinions we're getting to try and tee things up to get Section 230 before the Supreme Court again at some point. And we just got a great ruling from the Ninth Circuit about the Doe v. Twitter case. I think just yesterday or the day before. So
tell us what that is. What is Doe versus Twitter?
So the Doe versus Twitter case is one of the first cases that was filed in the country against an online platform for hosting and allowing the increased dissemination and failing to take down child pornography for two young boys who reported that their sexual assaults had been recorded and were being traded and sold and shared on Facebook. And both of these boys had to fight with Twitter, bring their parents in to get involved, to fight with Twitter, to say, hey, look, this is my kid in this video. This is his abuse. These are images of his abuse, a video of his abuse, and you're allowing it to be traded all over Twitter. We want you to take it down. It took Twitter a while to respond. Then they had to verify, the parents had to verify that they were their children. They had to show, identification cards proving that the kids were under 18, although they were very, it was very clear these were not adults. These boys were not adults. And Twitter just refused to take down the images. And so they've gotten sued. And this case has it was kind of the first of its kind, and it's gone up and down from trial court to court of appeals, and back down again. But we're seeing some sort of movement as people in the general population are starting to understand how much of a problem this is. I want to share, there's a wonderful organization in Canada called the Canadian Center for the Protection of Children, and they have done a ton of research, have wonderful statistics, not wonderful because they're good, but just really helpful data that shows there's a new individual, so not repeated, spliced up, modified, a new image of CSAM. There's 10,000 of them uploaded to the internet every 12 hours, every single day. New images. Imagine. That's just an extraordinary number.
Well, there's been a battle among constitutionalists on this whole subject because you get into the subject of free speech. And
right.
We've done a number of podcasts on it. I've interviewed Dershowitz about a half a dozen times, and we've had Greg Kelly from Newsmax, and we interviewed a lot of Roger Stone.
Okay,
David Schoen. We've had all these people as our guests. And the reality is there's a fight over what can be protected and what is protected under the First Amendment. And we are yet to see, from my standpoint as a lawyer, to see anything really definitive come out of it. This has to end up at the Supreme Court sooner or later. And if you look at Brandenburg versus Ohio, and you look at some of those cases that are out there, Griswold versus Connecticut and others, you find that subject has been bandied around for a long time. Brandenburg is not exactly a new case. That was the case in Ohio where the Ku Klux Klan wanted to march in Skokie. And the question was whether that stopping them was an invasion of their basic rights of communication. And so
Yeah,
constitutionally, we're looking at potentially some big changes. I would intellectually, I would say that. Of course, you have
exactly.
a very conservative Supreme Court, and I think there are a couple of those justices who might be amenable to making some modification because it's become so gross, and
Right.
it gets worse and worse every day. The more you have access to that computer, and everything's on a phone today, people don't necessarily have to sit home. You carry your phone with you, can do almost anything. And so
Exactly.
we're looking at some interesting modifications. But I want to ask you another thing because when I was looking at your resume, uh, you were either promoting or opposing DEI.
Yeah.
So let's spend the rest of our day today talking about DEI because we see what the government, our current president is doing versus what the prior president did and what the Democrats are pushing for. So
Mm-hmm.
tell us about it.
Well, I got my DEI education at Cornell during the pandemic. As you can tell, I like to always have busy hands and an active mind. So I went through my program during that time. I use it mostly in my leadership training business and helping folks build healthy, more successful teams. I do trainings for law firms, governmental entities, but again, mostly for private businesses, all kind of built around the argument that diverse teams are more profitable and more healthy. The other thing that I do is train teams how to be trauma informed. And I think these two things go together. When you're dealing,
Give us a definition of each, if you can.
of trauma informed and DEI.
Well, the use of DEI.
Yeah. So, so the use of it and why it's helpful for businesses is that diverse teams are more profitable. That has been studied up and down, and that's clear data. So if you want to have a healthy business and have staff be getting along rather than traumatized or fighting amongst each other, bringing other perspectives in makes ideas better, makes KPIs more achievable, key performance indicators more achievable. It really just helps lift the boat of any team or business when they're focusing on how do I make this product or this service more sellable, more appealable to this certain target demographic.
Well, don't you think that playing devil's advocate with you, don't you think that that kind of goes against the selection process and use of talent and experience versus just picking somebody because they're in a minority or something else? Don't you think that's prejudicial to the average guy or gal on the street?
Well, we're not talking about picking someone just because of those immutable characteristics, right? And we've got a whole body of law about what those characteristics, which ones are protected and how they should be protected in a work environment. We're just talking about picking the best and the brightest, and those that have some perspective that's different. And you can have a perspective that's different because you grew up in the South, but you're working at a company, in New York City, but they've got sales that they want to make in the South. I mean, everyone, it's really just a way to acknowledge and motivate people to bring their whole selves to the work environment. So we're not saying ever pick this person because of this characteristic. We're saying when you have diversity, when you have a little clash, they say pressure makes diamonds. When you've got a little bit of that discomfort. It's not everyone is, thinking the same way, speaking the same way, doing their job the same way. You're going to get more creative outcomes.
Don't you think it's prejudicial to people when others are selected because of a minority status, and those jobs are not available to people who are in the majority? Don't you think it's prejudicial to them?
But that's not really what we're talking about. We're not talking about excluding someone because they're in the majority. We're not talking about hiring someone or giving someone a promotion because they're in the minority. We're talking about everyone being unique and having different skill sets and bringing those skill sets. So the other thing that I want to say is, a lot of trainings on DEI are really focused on implicit biases. That's where it's like the first level of training. Everyone wants to get implicit bias training. The thing is, everybody has biases and they're not bad. I don't eat mayonnaise. I think it's gross. I know that's a weird example, but I don't care for that. A lot of other people do. That's my bias. I'm not ever going to say I would like mayonnaise on whatever sandwich. Again, silly example, but it's okay to have biases as long as we're not breaking the law. It's okay to say, I want a team of, people who know how to do X, Y, and Z. And then I want this other team to have people who have these other skills. That's what makes businesses good and successful. And you want your employees to be striving and to feel like they can be themselves, their true selves at work. So we're not talking about any sort of discrimination at all. We're talking about inclusion in a way that helps a business grow and be profitable.
What about quotas?
What about what?
Quotas. Quota. You're going to hire so many from here and so many from there, and etc. What do you think about those?
I don't, those are benchmarks that I don't think are very helpful. I don't think they change the dynamic in a workplace, especially if it's already toxic. So I don't, I don't work with any companies who have quotas. It's just like in advertising, when you hire, for example, a marketing agency to help your business, they're going to say, who's your ideal customer? And you kind of come up with the avatar of what kind of qualities they're going to have or what interests they're going to have. That's the same to me as building a good team. It's not thinking any specific human in mind. This is the vibe, as the kids say. They're very into vibes these days. This is the vibe we're going for. These are the skills we're looking for. And then whoever has the most qualifications, great.
Why do you think there is so much negativity and opposition to DEI programs?
I think that, at this point of where we are politically and in our culture, I think there's a lot of fear. I think that there are a lot of folks who are in the majority or have been in the majority who feel like they're losing that, and they're afraid. They want equal access to be able to support their family just like, they had before. And so any sort of change, I think, can feel like something has been taken away from them. But again, it's what is the expression about a rising tide raises all boats? Like, if we're really talking about team cohesion, it really should be the best people for the job.
Best people for the job has nothing to do with where they come from, do they?
No. Or the color of their skin or their gender or gender identity or any of those things. It's who has the skills and who is going to bring a different perspective to challenge the status quo, to increase profits and to increase cohesion. A lot of times we do see people who come from underrepresented groups having different challenges that the rest of the team hasn't had. And that, learning about and understanding that experience, that lived experience, can help.
Why is it Why is there so much opposition? And there is a lot of opposition.
Well, there is a lot of opposition, and there's a lot of stuff going on politically and in this country right now, where there are very strong opinions being expressed on social media that are not compassionate and that are not really open-minded. But that's that's unfortunate. I think that if we could all take a step back and take a look at where we were and where we want to be, we might be able to kind of bridge the gap. But right now it's really us versus them mentality, and a lot of people are feeling unprotected.
Well, in the remaining 1 minute, I guess, where are we going with this? Is there going to be some way that the balance will be found? Or is there going to be an opposition like there is right now that's going to take effect? Or is other things going to happen on the horizon?
I think there's going to be a growing understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion really means. I think that there was a lot of fear. People were afraid they would lose their job to someone who checked a box that they didn't check, and maybe they thought that person was unqualified or underqualified or whatever. But people tend to be magnanimous until they see that something, or fear that something is going to hurt them, and then folks become self-interested. So if we are just all trying to row in the same direction, then I think that things tend to work themselves out, if we're talking in a business perspective. And in terms of the government and politics, we're in a very strange time right now. It's very different than anything we've seen in this country, and so different groups are going to have different perspectives on what they think is right and what directions they want to go in. But I don't think just because someone would like to hire someone who happens to check a box or is diverse in one category or 10 categories, I don't think we should tell private businesses, and I don't think the government should operate from a perspective where they're saying we're not going to allow any of that. I think that's going to hurt our economy.
Maybe it will, and maybe it won't. I guess we'll have to wait and find out, or there's always going to be some slight modifications or compromises. But I agree with you. Politically, there's a big, big divide right now. The Democrats are very much in favor. The Republicans are opposed. I mean, that's pretty clear from the statistics. No matter what you watch, whether you watch at CNN, you get the left side, or you watch a Newsmax and you get the right side. But the bottom line really is, it's really pretty fluid now, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I'm just hoping we can all kind of get back together on some level, just to make sure we're doing what we can for future generations. We have obligations.
Well, yeah, I just want to kind of close with the comment, kind of like a personal view of it. Hatred, if you look at the hatred, of course, is ego. And a lot of that hatred stems from the thought that somebody's going to take away what I have. And in reverse, somebody has something that I want and I don't have it. So if you look at things like anti-Semitism and otherwise, you're going to find that's basically where we're at. Because most of these people, if you ask them why they hate something, they don't have a reason. It's just they just do it. But the real reason is the subliminal spiritual side of it. If you hate somebody, you're doing yourself real damage, because you're attracting what you put out there. And if you want to hate somebody, somebody's going to hate you too. So that's the way it works. Anyway, I want to thank you. It was a very interesting discussion. I learned a lot. In fact, one of the benefits of doing these podcasts is I'm learning about all these subjects. So when I first started to practice law, and a case involving cattle feeding, what did I know about cattle feeding? Nothing. But at the end of the day, I knew how much it took, how much they had to eat, prices and whatever. So you learn something by listening to others and not just to listen to yourself talk. So I want to thank you. It was very, very interesting and educational. And I wish you well in your future endeavors. Take a nap sometime.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is that court ordered? Because I will if I'm ordered.
By the way, I do miss doing it. I think my personality kind of has been shaped by my 10 years on the bench. And the reality is it's hard to adjust sometimes, not be too oppressive. But we work very hard at it. So thanks very much, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.